Today on Everyday Tactical Vids, we're going to be looking at the Falcon from the Ontario Knife Company. Let's talk through some of the specs on the Ontario Knife Company Falcon, and then we'll show you what it looks like in use. Your blade steel is 5160 steel, your overall length is 8 inches, your blade length is 4.25 inches, and your blade thickness is 0.26 inches. It does have that powder coat on it. It is a flat grind. It also has a black sheath that is MOLLE compatible, and your Rockwell hardness is between 53 and 55. Now this is from their Ranger series of knives, so they have the RAK, the R-A-K, they have the Afghan, and then they have the Falcon as well. This is the smallest of the three, and basically Ontario Knife Company says that the Ranger line is built for combat and survival, and they make the claim, and I think it's probably pretty true, that this is a knife that's going to last generations. This thing is definitely a hefty specimen of a knife, so let's show you up close what it looks like, and then we'll use it. We'll look at it from end to end here. You can see it does say Falcon and then OKC Ranger series there. There's your handles. And then coming back the other way, OKC USA. No exposed pommel on the end. And then here's what it looks like in hand. So that's where it's going to fall as far as, you know, the handle size. And I would say I have large size hands. Here's a look at the knife in the sheath. You can see you got those two snaps that go over the handle. There is no retention other than the snap, so make sure that you snap it in once you actually put it in the sheath. And then you have this pocket right here on the front if you want to put in, you know, a lighter, a ferro rod, a sharpening stone, other types of items. On the back you can see it is MOLLE compatible. And when it comes to the sheaths, a lot of people mention this as kind of a beef that they have with Ontario Knife Company, but I would just say you can absolutely get custom sheaths made by other people for these knives, and I will show you in a moment that if you did have a Kydex sheath that you made to ride a little bit high for this knife, it would be really easy to carry, and since it's such a compact knife, it's not going to be easily seen. So if you're in some sort of line of work where you want to have a real hefty fixed blade on you, this could be a good option, especially if you get a custom sheath like a Kydex made, because you know you want it to not be kind of bouncing off your leg but riding up really on your hip a little bit more. As it is, the Kydex sheath or the MOLLE sheath here works fine. It performs its duty and does what it needs to do. And let me show you what it looks like right now by putting it on my belt. Here's what it looks like attached to my belt. I am wearing a rigger's belt here, so it is wider than probably your average, you know, dress belt or something you're wearing every day. But it sits nicely, and because of the weight and even the thinness, it's not super wide. I find that it doesn't move a ton. The thickness of the opening here, when you run a larger belt through it, just keeps it in place, so it doesn't seem to have a lot of movement. And then when you want to take out the knife, obviously click these two snaps back, and then take the knife out, and you're ready to go. So this is where the knife normally rests, and I do know that I have it unclipped. I want to show you something quickly. So it's going to run down, you know, to the top of my cargo pocket on these pants. If I wanted to make a custom Kydex sheath for this knife, let's say I took the knife out and I set it on my belt so that the knife was resting like so. Let me step forward a little bit here. You can see, I mean, if the knife was there on my Kydex belt with a Kydex sheath on my belt, that thing would be totally covered up. And it doesn't really, I mean, unless you really squeeze this, it'll start to print. But you know, if you're in a line of work where you got to have a big hefty knife on you, I think if you had a Kydex sheath, even if it was totally exposed like this, you know, you work in a construction site, you need a big knife or something, whatever, you could set it up so that it rides, you know, up here and is not bouncing off your leg. And then certainly if you're in a situation, you're law enforcement, military, whatever, you want to have a hefty knife like this on you, but you don't want it revealed by this sheath that's hanging down to your leg, you can make a custom Kydex pretty quickly and pretty easily. A lot of companies out there doing it, and pretty much no one will know that the knife is there. Certainly check all the rules and laws and regulations in your area to see if you can actually have a knife that's concealed at all. But for those in law enforcement, military, where they need something like that, this could be a good way to set it up. One of the beefs that people are going to have with a knife like the Falcon is that it's so small, right? So because it's not a very large blade, people are going to say, well, you can't baton with it, and is it going to be able to perform the tasks you need it to perform when you're out in the woods? Now what I'm going to tell you is that I think there are advantages to a larger knife. I just got done reviewing the Ontario Knife Company Rat 7, and I kept saying that knife was very manageable despite its larger size. It didn't feel like it was, you know, way out of balance. It was just an easy knife to use. Now this one is small, but I do think it's going to perform a lot of the same tasks. You just need to kind of think a little bit differently because you don't have a large knife or a small knife and like an axe or a saw or something like that. You just need to think differently about how to use this in order to perform the tasks you want to perform. So what we're going to do today is, instead of batoning, I'm going to show you a way that I actually get dry wood if I want to make a fire. It's definitely a cold, damp day. It's been raining on and off for the past 2 days, so it has been, there's a lot of just kind of moisture in the area. The ground is wet, but we're going to show you even using some damp wood, we can get into some of the dry wood inside without batoning, and we're going to use the Falcon to do just that. What you're looking at here is a bunch of wood that has been knocked down on purpose by me. This was an old shelter that I had probably a couple years ago, and so I'm just taking it down. And then over here on the ground we actually have some of the paracord I used to tie parts of the shelter together, and we're going to start off by just taking that apart using the Falcon, and then we'll actually start disassembling some of the wood for a fire. We got a little paracord here. Let me just cut through that using the Falcon. And I will tell you that, you know, where my hand falls, it's basically just right. I would say I have large sized hands. The edge of my pinky is just a tiny bit beyond that, but the way this is curved out, it still rests quite comfortably. So I don't need to grip it that tight to cut this, so I can just cut through like this, and you can see, and that's easy work for the Falcon here. I'm not going to be using this paracord for anything, so let me just cut it into a bunch of tiny pieces here, and I'll show you how efficiently the Falcon works. So there's that. It actually cuts quite clean too. This one's going to be a little bit hard because it's a little bit short. But yeah, I mean, this, despite that thicker blade on a very small knife, it does cut very cleanly. You can see I've cleared out that area there where I'm going to make my fire, and next thing we'll do is that dead log right there. We're actually going to kind of chop through it using the Falcon, and as you look at the knife in my hand, you can see there's no lanyard hole, so that's going to be a downside as far as, you know, being able to grip way back here and use a lanyard. But I do think we'll still be able to get the job done with the knife. So let's move that log over to the dirt spot, and then we'll chop through it. So what I'm doing here is actually I'm going to chop through this log, and then I just want to put some wood down on the ground. This is a little bit moist, but it's less moist than the ground. So I'm going to chop through this and then lay down basically a foundation that I'll build my fire on. Let's see how this works. So I'm trying a bunch of different grips. Trying like this. I'm also trying really with my middle finger in that last little groove. And so I do find when it's back here, you got to hold it a little bit tighter because it wants to slip out just because it is smaller, but it still does work. And as I was noting before, some people are going to say, well, it's too small for a survival knife, but when you get this far in, and probably even before I did this, you could probably just snap the wood. So sometimes people feel like they need to use their knives and their tools for everything that they're doing out in the outdoors. You certainly don't. This is now definitely a weak spot, and I can snap this off quite easily. So we'll get a couple more pieces of wood about that size, and then we'll lay our foundation. This is pine, so it's definitely a soft wood. I'm going to try this with gloves on in a couple minutes just to see if that makes any difference as far as how the knife handles. I want to be clear here, I'm not saying this is a chopper. It's not a chopper, but the question is, could you, if you wanted a compact knife or you didn't have a large knife, could you still use this in a chopping method? And you certainly could. You're not getting the same leverage that you will with a big knife when you're swinging it, but it's definitely working here. So we've got those logs down as the foundation. We're going to build our fire on top of that. I want to get some dry bark from this cedar, so we're going to use the back, use the spine of the knife to do a little scraping here. And as you can see, I've used this one before, so this side is a little bit barren. So we're going to try up a little bit higher, maybe like this. Yep, that's definitely doing it. That spine is definitely sharp enough to do the job here. Now the other thing we'll do is we'll actually use the blade side and just cut out some of this bark to get to it, and that's working just fine as well. Here's a look at some of that tinder that I got from the cedar tree. A little bit moist still, so we're gonna fluff that up a little bit more, and we'll keep it in my pocket to maybe use my body heat to dry it out a little bit. And let's go get some more wood for this fire. When it's wet out and you're trying to make a fire, you do sometimes have to make a couple changes and do things differently than you would if it was totally dry. So one of those things, you know, whether you have snow or it's wet out, getting something to get your fire up off the ground is good. Now another big thing is that if you don't have dry wood, you got to get into the inner parts of wood or find dry wood that's, you know, under some sort of covering. Certainly tiny little hemlock branches, pine branches can be good, but a lot of people look and they say, well, you got a baton because you got to get to that inner dry wood. Now that is a helpful way to get into the inner dry wood. And just to note here, even with this, the Falcon, you probably still could baton through that. This is a piece of pine that I found from a tree that was chopped down across a trail a while ago. And so I've processed it, that's why it's a little bit flatter on both sides. But you could still baton with that. However, I want to show you that even if you have a small knife and you can't baton, you can still get to dry wood, and the way is just to shave away a bunch of the outer sections that are dry to get into that inner wood. So I've kind of locked it in here to the ground and then against my stomach. And even these outer pieces, I'm going to save those because once the fire gets hot enough, I can toss these on. So I'll just pile this on here. But as I'm cutting in, I can already see a difference in the coloration of the wood because it's drier on the inside. Is batoning a ton easier? It could be. Depends on the knife and the situation. But this is another way to get to that dry wood. If you have a small knife and you can't baton, you can just kind of slice off pieces till you get to that inner dry wood. This wood is already notably drier, but I'm going to get in a little bit deeper into the wood before I start getting some of that really fine inner pine that I'm going to use to start my fire up. You can see I've got my gloves on now, and I do find it a little bit more comfortable with gloves. It's not infinitely more comfortable, but it's definitely more comfortable. And you hear that snap. Now I'm into some of the drier wood in here, so I'm gonna just get some of this top wood out of the way, and then I start a separate pile. So I've got a pile here of semi-dry wood. I'll start another one down here, and then I can process that up in a minute. And this is certainly not going to be nearly as easy if you use like maple or oak or something that's much harder, but pine is a great way to start a fire if you can find some dry pine. The other thing too is that if I can get in here and even get a small piece out of here, I can make a feather stick with the inner wood that's already dry. What I've got here is some of that inner dry wood, and I'm just going to process it down. I'm gripping the knife like this, and I'm just going to make slices to get some really small pieces of wood. You have to be careful obviously when you're doing this, because you don't want to go too fast and aggressively because you can slip and cut yourself. But I've got a couple tiny ones there. You can see already, quite small. I'll put these to the side. I'm just going to process the rest of this down so I get a nice bunch of tiny little pieces of dry wood. So what I just showed you, putting a piece of wood down and slicing like this, is one way to process it. The other thing you can do, and it's not as easy as when you have a bigger piece of wood, but you can make tiny little feathers out of this one. And again, with a 1/4 inch thick blade or a little bit bigger than 1/4 inch, sometimes that's challenging. But you can see, and that's really small. That'll start the fire nicely. And so I'll just put that over my pile and make some more of those. And you got to be careful again, because you're not pressing into a really strong piece of wood. That's going to flop around a bit, so be aware of that. But you can still get some of those little feathers. So you can see what that looks like. I'll zoom in here real quick so you can take a close-up. There's a look at some of those tiny little curls there. So easy enough to do with my Falcon. Okay, we're about to start our fire here. What we've got is our foundation, then some birch bark on top of that, then some of the cedar bark, some of those fine pieces of wood, and then some of the other larger pieces of wood, all from the drier portion of that pine that I was cutting away at. We're about to start our fire, and now it's going to get controversial because to start this fire, I'm going to use a lighter. Why? Why? Okay, in all seriousness, we are going to use a lighter to start the fire, and the reason I want to do that is because when I make videos where I start fire, most of the time I'm using a fire steel because I think that presses me to refine my skills more and more. It'll press you even more if you start a fire with a bow drill or a hand drill, something like that. But I try to keep a lighter on my person, in my bushcraft kit, in my emergency kits, in my car at all times. So I pretty much always have a lighter around me, and so when it comes to just getting a fire started quickly, the lighter is usually one of the best ways to do it. Lighter matches, really simple to do it that way. Fire steel, yes, it can get wet and still work, but even a lighter can do that if you know how to properly handle a lighter or you have the right kind of lighter. Even if it gets wet, it's still usable. So the main point of this video is not to show you using a lighter or fire steel. It's to show you that even using a small knife like the Ontario Knife Company Falcon, you can get everything together to get a fire going. I do want to show you that the spine is steep enough to throw sparks off of a ferro rod, so check this out real quick. Get a good angle for you. So that will work. I will mention to you that it does start to scrape off a little bit of your coating here, so just a heads up, but it definitely will throw sparks off that spine. Once we get this fire lit, we're going to see if we can keep it running for 3 minutes at least, because that'll give us a good base that we could add to. If it burns for 30 seconds and dies out, I wouldn't really call that a legit fire. So let's light this guy up here. There it goes. Once again, this is all wood or other items I gathered using our Ontario Knife Falcon. Okay, we got our fire cranking now, so we're going to start our timer and see if it'll run for 3 minutes with no one touching it. So as you can see, it's still burning. It's getting down to a nice bed of coals. And then let me adjust this so you can see how long we've been going. That bottom timer's going. You can see 5:10, 5:11, so about 5 minutes, and we still have a nice fire going. I like to do that 3-minute test just to see, is it solid enough. If I had to, deal with some other situation while I was out camping, will my fire survive for a couple minutes when I step away from it? Certainly, you got to feed it more wood to keep it going in the future, and also just be aware using soft wood, they're going to burn up. Those types of wood are going to burn up quickly. So pine and birch is what I use to get it going, which is great to start, but it dies out relatively quickly. Let me give you some parting thoughts on the Ontario Knife Company Falcon. I think you could see from using it that it is going to function well in an outdoor situation. It's not a big hefty chopper, it's not made to be that, but if you want a more compact knife, smaller but still a little bit bigger than a 1/4 inch thick, the Falcon could be a really good option for you. Would I use it with gloves or without gloves? I'd probably use it with gloves, not because of the comfort, but I just felt like it gave me a little bit more grip. It was completely comfortable. I didn't have any issues whatsoever with hot spots or anything like that. If they added a little bit more length on there, maybe it would be a little bit more comfortable, but you'd be adding size to it. Maybe a lanyard hole. Maybe there's a way you could actually figure out a way to add a tiny little bit of length there to add a lanyard hole, so you could put a lanyard on, and that would make it even more manageable when you're using the knife. I was impressed though. The reason I wanted to review this one is because I feel like the Afghan from Ontario Knife Company has gotten quite a bit of coverage, and I don't see as much about the Falcon or hear as much about the Falcon, so I wanted to try a smaller knife that they made. I've always said Ontario Knife Company makes great knives. They're budget friendly. They're not 30 bucks, but you don't have to spend 200 bucks to get the knife. And they really are going to last a lifetime. They're really well made. They're hefty and they're strong. And there are options for you if you want to get something different than that Molly sheath. You can set up a Kydex sheath, like I was saying before, to carry it around. Is this the knife I'm going to go to for all survival situations? No. But if I did have this knife and a saw or an axe or something like that, then this could definitely be doable. I'm going to have a review of the SP53 coming up. And so take a big chopper like that and a small knife like that, and you can combine those two, and they'd be a really nice setup or system for when you're out in the woods. So check it out. I put links down below if you want to purchase the Falcon. And thanks as always for checking out our videos here on YouTube. Please subscribe to Everyday Tactical Vids on YouTube if you haven't done so already. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check us out on Instagram and Tumblr as well. Take care.